Page 240. Some odd choices and one truly inscrutable one await us on this page. So let's begin. Doc does his what the hell line to Marty, and you know how we just saw a firefight, with terrorists, involving rocket-propelled grenades down here at the mall. Well, the cops in this book are better than movie cops, because they totally noticed when that happened too.
Nearby, the police had poured out of their cars and were busily rounding up the terrorists.
Come on, Gipe, you went out of your way to give them names and motivations earlier in the book, but ever since the first chase scene you refer to them only as the terrorists. Anyway, these book cops aren't that much better than the movie cops because they entirely miss out on the only other people standing around in the deserted parking lot by a van and don't so much as glance in their direction, allowing them to run away with ease.
Let's get out of here, Doc Brown said. This is going to be impossible to explain. I'm with you, Marty said. Together, they ran toward the mall core and disappeared into the shadows as even more police cruisers turned the corner into the mall. As they sped away in the step van, the two men discussed their adventures.
And man, wouldn't it be awesome if that was the ending to the whole book right there? Wouldn't it? No? Okay, I can see your point and I respect it. Marty admits to screwing up a little. Doc asks how, and Marty explains the whole "this used to be Twin Pines Mall until I ran over a pine tree in the past by accident" thing, ending with,
I guess that's why they call it Lone Pine now. Doc Brown smiled. You'll probably notice a lot of things like that, he said. It'll be your own private joke with Hill Valley for the rest of your life. Yeah.
That's how the conversation ends, with Marty just trailing off with yeah. And I'm pretty sure you can read a lot into that. I, for example, read it as Marty being worried that he's changed so much he won't recognize anything, and concerned that all his relationships and friendships he remembers have been destroyed or altered beyond recognition with strange new ones in their place. But whatever. Okay, so here's the part one don't get at all.
A few minutes later, they reached the DeLorean and Doc got inside. Won't start, eh? He said. Marty nodded. Doc reached under the ignition, flipped a hidden switch and smiled as the engine roared to life. What are your plans now? Marty asked.
What the hell? What's that switch doing there? Here are the possibilities. That switch was always there, and Doc built the DeLorean with a will to queue out by failing to start for a little while the first time, and then actually failed to start the second time switching the machine. Half of me wanted Doc to say at this point, nobody can start this car but me. But why? Why is this here and how did Marty get around it anyway? Faulty Doc wiring? This scene is weird, you guys. The end. Page 241. On this page Marty asks Doc what his plans are, and Doc says he's gonna wait till the cops are gone from the parking lot, go back to his van, pick up the plutonium pellets there and take a look at the future. How far?
Doc shrugged. I figure I'll take it slow at first, he replied. Maybe I'll go about 30 years, just to get my feet wet. Then maybe I'll take a look-see at the 22nd or 23rd centuries. Well, good luck, Marty said.
The 22nd and 23rd centuries part stands out as being weird, but whatever, maybe it's cool that the temporal expanse of Back to the Future can get enlarged a bit. The time machine is good at traveling all through time, we don't need to limit ourselves to within a claustrophobic plus or minus 100 years of 1985.
Doc says it's funny, isn't it? I had to wait 30 years to catch up with you. Now you've got to wait 30 years to catch up with me. Ain't life weird? And then he winks and closes the door and drives off.
Then Marty presumably walks home and goes to bed and the next morning wakes up and thinks it was all a crazy dream. But then he pinches himself and it's not. So he pulls out his record company submission form from the trash and puts it in a mailing envelope.
Why not? My music has been wowing them for 3 decades. I'm a cinch to win.
And then goes and sees his family is all different. Weird. So, at this point let's talk Marty. Specifically, let's talk about this sequence of events. The Marty we've been reading about, Marty Prime, goes back in time at the Twin Pines Mall. Marty Prime has some adventures that change things: the name of the mall, the circumstances of his parents' meeting, his family's history. Marty Prime goes back to the present, goes to the Lone Pine Mall, and watches himself go back in time again. See the problem? Marty has returned to a future where at least some things have changed. We know for sure the name of the mall has, and we know for sure that Doc's spent the past 30 years trying to act natural while knowing he's totally going to invent a time machine and meet Marty and wear a bulletproof vest someday. The world we're in isn't identical to the one that Marty left at the beginning of the story. And that's a problem. It's actually a huge problem, because it means the Marty going back in time now isn't the same Marty that left at the beginning of the story, and time travel is basically the poster child for sensitivity to initial conditions. This new Marty has had different experiences, from things as small as the name of the mall to as large as what his family does for a living and being presumably a better off richer family. Yet, luckily for Marty Prime, end up in the same house. Due to different life experiences, the Marty traveling back in time just recently is a different person than the one we met at the beginning of this story. Let's call him Marty 2. Marty 2, being that different person, is absolutely going to have different adventures in 1955 than Marty Prime did. There's a few ways these adventures could turn out, especially considering how narrowly Marty Prime avoided disaster when he was running through them. Marty 2 doesn't get his parents back together, and so he ceases to exist. Result: Marty 2 and Marty Prime were never born, which causes major damage to the space-time continuum. Marty 2 does get his parents back together, but slightly differently, as Marty 2 would interact with Doc differently. Remember, Marty 2 wouldn't know anything about George being hit by the car and such, and grew up thinking his dad was boss, so there's nothing in his mind he would need to fix. This results in a new, again altered 1985 where Marty 2 watches Marty 3 go back in time. Result: a loop, potentially infinite. The timeline may never stabilize into a solid reality ever again, and Marty 212,626 could watch Marty 212,627 go back in time. This is probably a bad thing. Marty 2 doesn't mess with his parents' meeting at all, and so has a different adventure in 1955. At the end of this, either he returns or he doesn't. So either Marty is never born, Marty's successful trip back to 1985 gets erased, undoing all the work Doc and Marty have put into it and maybe destroying the universe in a paradox, or the timeline starts looping, never reaching a stable new reality. Those are really the only options we've got, and none of them are great. They all kinda suck, actually.